In the untamed lands of Thrace, where mountains met sky and warriors were born from the harsh embrace of nature, lived a man whose name would become legend. Born during a winter so fierce that wolves sought shelter among men, Spartacus entered the world as his mother gazed upon a falling star, an omen, the tribal elders said, of a destiny that would shake the foundations of empires. His father, Theron, a tribal elder renowned for his wisdom in both combat and counsel, taught him not just to wield a sword, but to understand the hearts of those who followed him. His mother, Lyra, a healer whose knowledge of herbs and spirits made her both respected and feared, showed him that true strength lay in protecting those who could not protect themselves. Young Spartacus learned the ways of his people through stories told around fires that pushed back the mountain darkness. He heard tales of ancestors who had fought against Persian armies, of tribal heroes who had outwitted mighty kings, and of the sacred bonds that held their people together. But it was in the daily life of his tribe that he truly learned what it meant to be a warrior. He watched as his father mediated disputes with patience and fairness, saw how his mother's healing touch brought comfort to friend and stranger alike, and understood that leadership meant serving others before oneself. By his 16th summer, Spartacus had already distinguished himself in raids against rival tribes and in defense of his people's lands. Yet it was not his prowess with weapons that set him apart. It was his ability to see beyond the immediate battle, to understand the flows of power and strategy that determined the true course of conflicts. He learned to read the land as others read scrolls, to predict where enemies would strike, and to turn nature itself into an ally. When he met Sura, it was not at a grand gathering or in the heat of battle, but in a quiet grove where she performed her sacred duties as a priestess. She was tending to the tribal shrine, her dark hair adorned with flowers and sacred herbs, when Spartacus came seeking guidance before a dangerous mission. Their first conversation lasted until the stars emerged, touching not on war or prophecy, but on the simple dreams that even warriors harbor in their hearts. Sura's wisdom ran deeper than mere prophecy. She understood the currents of fate that moved beneath the surface of daily life. Their courtship was witnessed by the whole tribe, becoming the stuff of songs still sung generations later. Spartacus would return from battles with rare herbs for her rituals, while Sura wove protective charms into his armor. Their love was blessed by both elders and gods, celebrated with feasts that lasted 7 days. Together, they dreamed of building a future where their children could grow up in peace, where the wisdom of their people could flourish without the constant threat of war. But the shadows of Rome grew longer with each passing season. What began as distant rumors of legions moving through neighboring lands soon became columns of dust on the horizon. Roman diplomats arrived with honeyed words and veiled threats, speaking of alliance, while their eyes measured the wealth of Thracian lands. They spoke of civilization and progress, of the benefits of joining the Roman world, but their fine words could not hide the glint of steel that backed them. The tribal council debated for days. Some argued for immediate resistance, others for strategic submission. Spartacus, though young, spoke with a wisdom that surprised even the elders. He saw that open defiance would mean destruction, but also understood that complete submission would mean the death of their way of life. He proposed a middle path, selective cooperation that would buy them time while preserving their strength. When Rome demanded warriors to serve in their legions, Spartacus volunteered to lead the Thracian contingent. The night before his departure, Sura performed a ritual that left her trembling and pale. She spoke of blood and fire, of chains broken and eagles falling, of a path that would lead not to home, but to legend. Spartacus held her until dawn, memorizing the scent of her hair, the sound of her breathing, the feeling of her hands tracing the scars on his skin. The Roman army was a revelation that transformed Spartacus's understanding of warfare. Here was power on a scale his people had never imagined. Legions that moved like great machines, supply lines that stretched across continents, siege engines that could tear down any wall. He learned their language, studied their tactics, and observed their weaknesses. The Romans dismissed him as another barbarian, never noticing how carefully he watched, how deeply he understood. But with this knowledge came growing horror. He watched as Roman efficiency turned to cruelty, as discipline became an excuse for brutality. Villages were burned not for any military purpose, but to demonstrate Roman power. Allies were treated as tools to be used and discarded. Women and children, whom his people considered sacred, were regarded as spoils of war. The breaking point came during a campaign against a mountain village accused of harboring rebels. Spartacus saw himself in the fierce defenders, saw Sura in the village's priestess, saw his own people in the children hiding in terror. When the order came to massacre the population, he turned his weapons against his Roman commanders. The battle was brief but fierce, ending with Spartacus in chains and the village's survivors fleeing into the mountains with a story that would soon become whispered legend. His journey to the slave markets of Rome was a descent into a world of suffering he had never imagined. Chained in the holds of ships and marched along endless roads, he witnessed the vast machinery of human misery that powered the Roman world. Yet even here, he began to see the possibilities that his captors missed. In the shared glances between slaves, in the whispered words of comfort, in the small acts of defiance, he recognized the seeds of revolution. Batiatus's ludus in Capua was both prison and proving ground. The lanista saw in Spartacus not just another strong back to train, but a prizefighter who could make his fortune. The training was brutal, designed to break men's spirits as much as strengthen their bodies. But Spartacus approached it with a warrior's discipline and a strategist's mind, learning not just how to fight in the Roman style, but how to think like Romans while maintaining his own identity. It was in the ludus that Spartacus began to build the brotherhood that would shake Rome. Crixus, the proud Gaul who initially saw him as a threat, became his first true ally after Spartacus saved his life during a dangerous training exercise. Their different styles, Spartacus's calculated precision and Crixus's raw power, complemented each other perfectly. Gannicus, whose skill with dual swords was matched only by his rebellious spirit, brought crucial knowledge of gladiatorial showmanship that would later help them win crowds to their cause. Doctori, the African giant who trained them, recognized in Spartacus something he had not seen in decades of breaking men into gladiators. Their conversations, ostensibly about fighting techniques, often turned to deeper matters: the nature of freedom, the weight of leadership, the price of survival. Though Doctore remained loyal to the ludus during the eventual uprising, his teachings helped shape Spartacus into the leader he would become. The ludus also brought Spartacus into contact with the complex world of house slaves, whose battles were fought with whispers and careful observation rather than swords. Mira, whose quiet dignity reminded him of Sura, became his window into this world. She taught him the invisible networks that connected slaves across households, the secret languages of glances and gestures that passed information under their masters' noses. These lessons would prove invaluable when planning the rebellion. Spartacus's rise in the arena was meteoric. Each victory brought both greater fame and greater understanding of Roman society. He learned to read the crowds, to understand what moved them, to see how spectacle could be turned to purpose. Unlike other gladiators who lost themselves in arena personas, Spartacus maintained a core of quiet dignity that made him even more fascinating to the Roman audiences. They came expecting a barbarian, but found something more compelling: a warrior who fought with both skill and honor. The news of Sura's death arrived like a poisoned dagger, delivered with false sympathy by Batiatus himself. The lanista had arranged her murder while pretending to help reunite them, fearing that a wife would make his prize fighter harder to control. That night, alone in his cell, Spartacus performed the funeral rites of his people as best he could, singing the ancient songs of mourning that were meant to guide spirits home. His grief transformed into something harder and more dangerous than mere revenge. It became purpose. The rebellion was planned with the same careful strategy that had marked Spartacus's entire life. Each gladiator was tested, each house slave evaluated, each weapon and exit route memorized. Mira's network of house slaves provided crucial intelligence about guard rotations and villa layouts. Crixus and Gannicus trained their fellow gladiators in techniques specifically designed for fighting Roman soldiers rather than arena opponents. The uprising itself was a masterpiece of timing and coordination. During a celebration where Roman nobles gathered to watch private gladiatorial games, the rebels struck with precision that would have impressed any legion commander. Guards were eliminated silently. Weapons were distributed according to carefully laid plans, and when the signal came, the villa erupted into controlled chaos. Spartacus himself led the assault on the main hall, his earlier arena performances allowing him to get close to the gathered nobles before revealing his true purpose. As news of their success spread, the rebellion grew beyond anything even Spartacus had imagined. Slaves fled their masters in droves, bringing with them crucial skills and knowledge. Farmers who joined them knew how to live off the land and hide entire communities in the wilderness. Miners could forge weapons and tunnel under Roman defenses. Former house slaves established intelligence networks that kept them one step ahead of Roman responses. But success brought new challenges that tested Spartacus's leadership in unexpected ways. The army became a mobile city, with all the complexities that entailed. Different groups brought different gods, different customs, different dreams of what freedom should mean. Former house slaves and gladiators clashed over status and responsibility. Some wanted to march on Rome immediately. Others wished to flee across the Alps, while still others dreamed of establishing a new nation in the hills. Spartacus met these challenges with the same wisdom he had learned from his father years before. He established a council that represented all major groups within the army, ensuring that former house slaves had as much voice as gladiators. He organized the army into smaller units, each with its own leader and responsibilities, fostering both efficiency and belonging. Most importantly, he never lost sight of the fundamental promise that had drawn people to his cause, the promise of dignity and self-determination. Their military successes were unprecedented. Spartacus combined his knowledge of Roman tactics with the guerrilla warfare techniques of his youth, creating a hybrid style that Roman commanders struggled to counter. He used the terrain to his advantage, choosing battlegrounds that negated Roman numerical superiority. His army could split into smaller groups to evade pursuit and reunite at predetermined locations, a flexibility that the rigid Roman military structure couldn't match. The arrival of Marcus Crassus changed everything. Unlike previous Roman commanders who had underestimated Spartacus, Crassus recognized him as a worthy opponent. He studied reports of Spartacus's tactics, interviewed survivors of defeated legions, and built an army specifically designed to counter the rebels' advantages. More dangerously, he understood the importance of attacking the rebels' unity, using spies and provocateurs to amplify existing tensions within Spartacus's army. The final battle was both an ending and a beginning. On the night before, Spartacus walked among his people one last time. He spoke not of glory or revenge, but of the dignity they had found in choosing their own path. He reminded them that whatever happened the next day, they had already achieved something unprecedented. They had shown that the mightiest empire in the world could be shaken by the power of human dignity. The battle itself was fought with a fury that would be remembered for centuries. Spartacus led from the front. his sword claiming Roman lives even as his army began to falter under the weight of Crassus's superior numbers and resources. He watched as his closest companions fell, Crixus dying while protecting a group of non-combatants, Gannicus standing alone against overwhelming odds, Mira using her final moments to warn others of an encircling maneuver. When Spartacus finally fell, it was not to a celebrated general or noble warrior, but to the combined might of Rome itself. His body was never found among the dead, leading to legends that he had somehow escaped, that somewhere the great liberator still lived. Some said he returned to Thrace, others that he found refuge in lands beyond Rome's reach. These stories, though false, captured an essential truth. The spirit he represented could not be killed by Roman swords. In the centuries that followed, Spartacus's name became synonymous with the fight for freedom against overwhelming odds. His story was told in secret by slaves, celebrated by philosophers, and feared by tyrants. He became more than a man. He became a symbol of the indomitable human spirit, of the fundamental right to live in dignity, of the eternal truth that no power, no matter how mighty, can forever chain the human soul. The legacy of Spartacus lives on, not just in historical records or popular tales, but in the enduring idea that courage, leadership, and the desire for freedom can shake the foundations of even the most powerful empires. His greatest victory was not on any battlefield, but in demonstrating that the chains that bind the body cannot constrain the spirit, and that the price of freedom, though heavy, is always worth paying. His story continues to inspire those who fight against oppression, a testament to the power of one person to change the course of history and the eternal human struggle for liberty.